Have you ever had Chunibun syndrome? You know, that part in life, mainly in middle school, where you dream about having superpowers. Either it be the ability to fly and never have to walk, or simply teleport around the world so you can visit any and every place that you could dream of. Have you ever in class said to yourself, I know you can hear me. I know you're reading my mind right now, and try to talk to this psychic that may or may not be in your class or simply somewhere at your school? It doesn't really matter, but fantasizing about powers is something you did as a child. But at some point, you simply take in reality and stop at a certain point, or just stop thinking about it as much. Anyways, one day our main character was at home, just watching TV, doing what a normal high school student would do on a daily basis while eating crackers. And of course, when eating crackers, crumbs would always appear, so on a whim, he held out his hand and picked it up using telekinesis, thinking nothing of it. Next thing he knew, the crumbs were on his hands. As if this was a normal thing, he didn't think nothing of it until it hit him. Was that telekinesis? He was flabbergasted, so he tried using telekinesis to pick up a chip from the bag that he was eating, and nothing came out of it. He then went to his room, thinking about what had happened. So he tried to use telekinesis again, but nothing. So he went back to the crumbs. Instead of picking up a whole chip, why not crush it up into crumbs and pick it up with telekinesis then, repeating the same environment that he was at to make the telekinesis work? So he tried to pick up the crumbs with telekinesis and it worked. So he tried it again and again. This was not a dream. Because of this, RFC decided to overthink a lot of things. Am I special? Are my parents special? Did something happen to him when he was a child? Are these powers a side effect of a disease? Will using these powers have a negative impact on his body? Why did he awaken these powers? But as he thought more, he was normal. His parents were normal. He also didn't seem sick, according to the temperature check that he took just a couple seconds ago. There was no reason as to why or how he gained these powers, but just to make sure that it was not the case of gates opening up, interdimensional rifts opening up, and monsters coming up, and a status window starts coming up and saying you're awakened or anything like that. He decided to check the web to see if there was, news about these things, and there was nothing. He wondered if he should tell people, but decided it would be too much of a hassle, and if for some reason the government believes him, maybe they would do experiments on him, and that was not something he wanted to happen. After 3 hours of refreshing news website, thinking maybe a news article might pop up of some person somewhere awakening powers, but still, there was nothing. Eventually, as anyone who awakened to telekinesis would do, RMC started to test his limits of his powers. With the use of the small electric scale from his kitchen, he discovered that he could only move around 3 grams of things, or just 3 grams of weight in general, which was the weight of the crumbs that he previously used telekinesis to pick up. With more experiments, he came up with 3 things he had to do to use telekinesis. Number 1, look at the target. Number 2, hold out his hand. And number 3, put in strength. He didn't really have to hold out his hand, but if he didn't, he could only move around 1 gram of weight. So he had to hold out his hand, or if he doesn't, it would nerf him. It would nerf him somewhat. Just like how magician in fictional world would use chanting to cast a spell, it seems that he needed to hold out his hand to give a better output of his powers. Still, it feels like he was using some kind of invisible muscle. For number 3, he didn't use physical strength per se, but something else. Something he couldn't really describe, but when he focused on using telekinesis powers, it felt like he was using some kind of invisible muscle, so he named it the teleki muscle. He could only move things towards his hands or away from him in a straight line. Trying to move them in different directions was impossible, as his teleki muscle would become sore. And just like how you need MP to use magic in a fictional world, it seems that when he tried to pick up more things than just 3 grams. He just couldn't and started to get really tired, like mentally tired. Not physically. Anyways, his parents started to come home, so he called the experiments a day. The next day, he felt sore. Not mentally, nor physically. It was a different type of soreness. The invisible muscle he had, the telechi muscle, was sore. It was like when you go to the gym to work out for the first time in years, and the next day, your whole body just shuts down. Everything hurts. So for the next 2 days, he decided to just rest up and not use his powers. During that time, he kept checking the news to see if there were others, but nothing happened. There was no girls that came to save him, no secret organization kidnapping people with powers. Nothing in his ordinary life had changed at all, to the point where he was a bit disappointed. It wasn't like in the animes or mangas or any other sort of media. There was nothing happening. So he just stopped checking the news altogether. And on his 3rd day, he started to practice again, and now he could move 4 grams of weight. On his 4th day after awakening, he purposely hurt himself so he could go to the doctor. Maybe there might be something actually wrong with him. Some tumor or cancer cell or whatever. Some anomaly going on in his body. But as it turns out, nothing. He was perfectly healthy. After 10 days, he calculated that his powers grew in a 1.3 grams increment. If that was the case, in 1 year he could probably move Earth itself, but to hold his excitement and expectations in check, he assumed that there might be a limit to his powers, so he simply kept practicing. After a month later, he could now move around 8 kilograms. He also even got a bit proud of himself, using telekinesis to pick up an eraser he dropped at school, using telekinesis to do a magic trick in front of his friends. But because his friends kept pestering him about how he did it, show me how you did it, he decided to just not show his telekinesis to others because it would be a bit too tiring and a bit risky, just a bothersome thing to deal with. As he kept practicing, he started to move his desk, and then a car, and then a bus, to the point where he could now move 7 tons of weight. Still, it was just towards him or away from him in a straight line. Nothing too spectacular. But as time went on, it was getting difficult to find heavy things to move, since it seems you need to stimulate the telechi muscle for it to grow. Moving buses could no longer grow his powers. So instead of moving, he decided to practice moving it in 3-dimensional directions. Left, right, up, down, and all the other ones. In all directions. It was a bit difficult at first, and his telechi muscle pain was a lot harsher than moving 7 tons, but as months of practice came on, he could now move 7 tons in all directions, not just towards his hands. It was now his 3rd year in high school. He practiced and improved his telekinesis for 12 hours a day, but at the same time studying for college. Even with his ability of telekinesis, he still decided to just go the normal route of a normal human. But nonetheless, still practicing his psychic powers. He started to do more with his telekinesis. He somehow started practicing creating this sort of invisible barrier. It started off taking him hours to create this invisible telekinesis barrier the size of a coin, but as months of practice went on, he could now create barriers in just 5 seconds into any shape and size. Well, not any size, but you get what I mean. It was large enough to play with. So he chose a college close to the sea. Why? Well, the answer is simple. The heaviest thing he could practice his output on his telekinesis was buses. So instead of man-made things or man-made vehicles, why not lift water itself? With water itself, depending on how much you have, can weigh more than just 7 tons. With the telekinesis barrier that he had been practicing during his 3rd year in high school, he could now lift water with that ability, using his telekinesis to create a telekinesis membrane bowl and just lift up water with it. Simply practicing his psychic abilities for something. But still, nothing really interesting happened in his life. During university, he traveled around the world to places with rumors of the supernatural, to people who claimed to have psychic powers, but it was all in vain. No one had powers. They merely showed tricks and it became painfully clear to our MC that he is in fact the only person with powers. Or maybe the psychics were just really good at hiding, just like how no one knows that our MC had telekinesis. There might be others just like him. Or so he decided to delude himself. So he simply just kept practicing his telekinesis. It simply was now a hobby to him. Something that he just do. It's like breathing or just playing some League of Legends on a daily basis for hours upon hours. It was just a hobby to him. Practicing his telekinesis was fun. In his first year of university, he could now lift around 125,000 tons of water. And he also started to practice using telekinesis without his hands. As I have said before, when he doesn't use his hand, he's kind of nerfed. He can only output around 33% of what his normal output is with his hand. It would be weird to always have to put out his hands to use telekinesis. It would look cooler to just make things move with your mind. Although the output that he could muster without his hands were around 1/3 of what he could normally do, after months of practice, he had more than enough output without his hands. During his second year of university, he still kept practicing his powers. He started doing anything and everything he could physically do, he did it psychically. But still, that didn't mean that he neglected his body though. He still went to the gym and exercised his body. During this year, he also started to do more things with telekinesis. He experimented with making this kind of exoskeleton with his telekinesis. Just like with the barrier, maybe he could enhance his physical powers with telekinesis. Like maybe supporting his legs so he can jump as high as a building. Maybe covering his hands with a barrier to be able to punch and break rocks. And so he did. And it worked. He kept practicing, and it worked. But for what exactly? Although there was no secret organization that would come and take him, or was there anyone else who had powers like him? In the back of his mind, he just deluded himself, thinking that there must be people that did exist, and that maybe one day he would fight them to protect his normal life or something like that, to protect a girl. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's just his fantasy. But as his second year of university was closing in, and he continued to search for others like him, he simply just acknowledged that he was in fact the one and only psychic in this world. But that didn't deter his mentality. He simply just kept practicing and continued his university life. Maybe in the future, he would reveal himself to the public, do some kind of grand reveal that he is in fact a psychic, and maybe that would be cool. But for now, he's just attending university and practicing his telekinesis in silence, in private. It was now his third year in university. With his telekinesis training not giving him that much satisfaction, our MC decided to take his telekinesis into a different direction. You see, our MC had the power to hold back Fat Man, or the atomic bomb dropped in Japan during World War II. But he knew that there would be more things that he could do with his telekinesis. So he decided to practice his sixth sense, or should I say his teleki muscle. Every time our MC tries new ways to use his telekinesis, his teleki muscle would give this sort of feedback. The pain was what it was, the soreness. So if he does experimentations and the teleki muscle responded, then there can be a way to train it. For example, RMC had the ability to carry 8 tons, but he had to know the weight beforehand or simply calculate the weight afterhand. But he wanted to use telekinesis to use his 5 senses. He wanted to see, touch, smell, taste, and hear with telekinesis. And according to his teleki muscle, it was possible to do so. After months, he could tell the weight of an object by simply using telekinesis on it. So he then moved on to sight. To test his theory, he bought a telescope and used it to see far away and see if he can move things from an extremely long distance with a telescope. And look at that. He can. Although he could only push and pull the fundamentals of his powers, he also practiced with the foggy glass, trying to move things, through the glass, making, you can't see that well when you're looking through foggy glass, so trying to move things that you can't see is like halfway there. With months of practice, he could now feel the weight of things far, far away from him, to the point where he didn't need a telescope to continue his training. But he still couldn't just see just yet. He could feel things far away, but he couldn't exactly see how a normal human eye would see. After blindfolding himself and more practice, eventually he figured out how to actually see you with his telekinesis. Now you might be thinking, who is his main character and what is his name? I don't know, but let's talk about his new power to see using telekinesis. The amount of etchy things that he could do with this power is unfathomable. Although he could only feel the weight of something and not actually feel like how a hand would feel when touched with something. Imagine if he could actually feel. With touch and sight, he's basically a ghost. And I have read a lot of doujinshis to see where our MC could take this power. But remember, he had this power for 4 years and he had done nothing remotely special with it. He has done nothing with his powers. He didn't abuse it. He's done nothing with his powers. Our MC is not normal. Not in the sense that he had powers, but in the sense that he does absolutely nothing with his powers. Although he was sure that he was the only person with psychic abilities, he was still waiting for something or someone to take him to action. He was an introvert. He wanted to do stuff, but he was just, a bit introverted. So, after university, he worked in a small, normal salary, black company Japanese job for 2 years to come. Anyways, one day our main character was at home, just watching TV, doing what a normal salary worker would do on a daily basis while drinking beer. This time, a late night anime showed up. It was about a young boy and his beautiful female lead fighting an evil organization, and this pissed our main character off. This was the life that he wanted when he awoke in his powers. He wanted to meet a beautiful, extroverted girl that would lead him into the unknown, fighting an evil organization that worked in the shadows. But for his entire high school and university and 2 years of his adult life, he had done nothing. No adventure. He had the power to destroy Earth with a snap of his finger. But he was just stressfully working a salary job at a black company with no promotion in sight. With unpaid overtime, might I ask, and shitty bosses. Hiding his powers because he didn't want to stand out? No, not anymore. He had an idea. If there was no secret fighting evil organization, then why not create that secret organization himself? In fact, let's create the evil organization himself. If the extraordinary days won't come to me, then I myself would make those extraordinary days. I would make myself a fated rival. I would make a cute and powerful heroine. I would gather companions with unforgettable personalities. And so he immediately put in his resignation letter from his job, and his new life was about to unfold. RMC is now 24 years old, and only now does he intend to do something with his supernatural abilities that he had. Although he had 1.4 million yen in savings, he had no idea on how he would go with this ambition of his. The fact still remains. He was the only human who had superpowers. Even if he created an evil organization and an organization that fights that evil organization, who would fight? But still, he made a list of things he wanted to do, but realized that it would be hard to do them all by himself. He had to be the boss of both the evil organization and the good organization. So for the first thing he did was look for someone who would be a partner in crime. Someone who would be just as crazy enough to follow him on his path. Someone similar to him, without the powers of course, but that was not something he could control. So he started to search for his partner in crime. With his sixth sense, he started to scan areas around him, but found no one he liked. Then, on his 25th day of searching, he found a woman who was a year younger than him, named Shiori Kaburagi. She was quite unique, unlike any he had witnessed in these past 25 days of searching. First of all, she had her maids call her "my lady," or Ojo-sama. along with wearing unique not of this century type of clothing. Something someone would wear in Europe in the Middle Ages. Well, not someone, but something that the wealthy ladies would wear, as well as wearing kimonos unironically as everyday attire. Also, her past was also interesting. Until middle school, she was ugly and extremely obese, and now look at her. She felt like a completely different person. Her passion for self-improvement is admirable, and she is extremely intelligent. To our MC, it looks to be someone who is extremely passionate in things that they like and didn't care about what others think. Someone somewhat similar to our MC. Just like how our MC was extremely focused on his hobby, his psychic abilities, except for the fact that he did care about what other people think. So someone like her, who didn't care about what others think, was perfect, and she had the ambitions for the unordinary. She was also an extrovert, so that's a plus. But the most important aspect about her is that she was extremely Trinivian. Even at the age of 23 years young, she was still yearning for the supernatural. She had this notebook of detailed description of what she would do in a zombie apocalypse, what she would do in an isekai, what she would do if she awakened to superpowers, and lots of other scenarios that would never happen. Well, that would be, if not for our MC, of course. And he felt extreme respect for her and a bit of guilt for peeking into her daily life. And I mean, everything that she did. After a few more days, he decided to introduce himself. Apparently, our MC's name was Kinemitsu Sago. I don't know if I should start using his name or not, or just continue calling him our MC. Anyways, it was a beautiful scene that she already saw. She was just minding her own business when her fountain pen started to move on its own and started writing. All she could do was freeze and stare intensely at the supernatural occurrence that she had been daydreaming about her entire life. But just like how Sago, when he first awoke in his power, Shiori took her pen and dissected it, trying to make some sort of explanation of why and how this pen started to move on its own. She wouldn't just accept what she just saw. When the fountain pen was a normal pen, she started examining her whole room, from the roof to the floor. Nothing left unchecked. Eventually, she accepted and Sago gave her his contact. And all both of them could do was smile with excitement. Shiori especially could not contain her excitement, but she elegantly used her hand to gracefully cover her mouth. After 30 minutes of anticipation, she already got the news from her mate that Sago was here. There, Sago demonstrated his powers once more, that he is indeed a psychic, and Shiori could not be nothing but awed and led Sago to her room to discuss business. After her maid prepared some extremely expensive-looking black tea and left, Shiori immediately got down to asking the question she had been wanting to ask. Does she also have hidden powers within her? Shiori asked. Sago said no, immediately, not letting her down slowly at all, no hesitation. The hope and excitement that was beaming out of Shiori immediately dissipated, gone like the wind, only to be told by Sago that he only interacted with her because she was wealthy. But still, Sago told Shiori his life from the day he awoke in his power to now, both giving each other respect for their dedication to their own path. As Sago was about to leave, given that it was getting dark, Shiori convinced Sago to stay, with a bit of her charm, might I add. And so he did, and they talked more about their ambitions along with Sago's supernatural power at her own private library. With Shiori being a Chunin to a T, she made theories about how to gain superpowers, so with the help of Sago and his story and experiences, the teleki muscle that Sago mentioned in his explanation on his powers, and a few more questions, Shiori came with the conclusion that it could be possible to take a piece of Sago's teleki muscle and transplant it to her or something of that sort. Now, the teleki muscle wasn't a physical muscle, but Sago did feel it, so there was a possibility that it could be something physical. Just like how emotions and mental feelings comes from nerves and the brain, maybe there might be a nerve or something similar that is the teleki muscle itself. Since Shiori works at her own pace, it was 10 p.m. and she keeps to her schedule for health reasons, so she went off to bed, while Sago stayed at her private library for a bit. So right then and there, Sago started to examine his body with his sixth sense to look for this teleki muscle of his, and to his surprise, it was all over his body. Unfortunately for Sago, although he did only pinch a tiny itsy bitsy extremely small amount of his teleki muscle, when he tried to rip it out of his body, pain was all he felt. This was a type of pain where he had to physically fall to the ground and roll around as he couldn't hold the pain in. The type of pain that didn't make you pass out but feel extreme pain. So Sago called it a day and went to sleep and consulted Shiori in the morning. Unfortunately, Shiori had no solution to stop or ease the pain, so Sago just went on with the plan. Sago could relate with Shiori of wanting powers along with wanting another psychic like him, so Sago decided to bear the pain and pull out a teleki muscle. Even if the transplant didn't work out, if there was a small chance of even making more psychics like Sago, then why not go for it? So after a screeching amount of screaming, Sago managed to pull off a piece of teleki muscle. Surprisingly, the pain also immediately disappeared after the teleki muscle got torn off. Now for the next part, it took 10 minutes to transplant it to Shiori, but it was successful in the end. As they waited, Sago suggested the idea of a secret base in Antarctica, but Shiori immediately turned that down. Sago giving more ridiculous, ambitious secret base ideas, none of them were even feasible with the capital Shiori had, nor would these ideas have been practical. So in the end, Shiori and Sago agreed with a bar located along a narrow alleyway in Tokyo, with Sago using his telekinesis to make more space underneath for the actual secret part of the secret base. A week later, Shiori knew from instinct that she had developed powers, but still didn't know what it was. When she activated her powers, everything went dark and she couldn't see nor do anything. But as time went on, she noticed something that didn't add up. The watch on her wrist was 1 minute ahead of the time on her computer. This was something impossible. Shiori was not the type of girl to let such imperfections, so she came to the conclusion that she must be stopping time. It all made sense. Only her and the things on her worked for that brief 0.5 seconds when she stopped time. Since light also stopped, this could be the reason why she couldn't see anything, as in light is what makes the eyes see. As time went on, Shiori wanted to train to see during her time stop, but Sago urged and convinced her to stick to the fundamentals. So, heeding his advice, she trained her fundamental, which for her was time. How long can she maintain her time stop abilities? Sago, being a bit jealous, also tried to learn how to stop time. Since Shiori got her powers from his teleki muscles, then surely he would be able to do the same thing. But in the end, it was not possible at all. It seems that the mutation is a mutation, and Sago could not train to stop time no matter what theory he crafted. 2 months later, Sago officially resigned from his job. But just like what you might have guessed, filthy black companies like the place Sago worked at didn't pay Sago his rightfully earned money for those 2 months. Shiori offered to help hire a lawyer, but Sago had better things to do, like creating an evil organization and an organization that fights that evil organization. Now that Sago was unemployed, he had no way of making money. He was relying on Shiori to build the secret base in Tokyo, but he still wanted to contribute in some way. As a man, or simply as a man raised in Japan, unemployment is not something they take lightly, a disgrace as one might call it. So Shiori suggested working at the secret base. They were planning on having it be a front and not actually open the bar for the general public, but since the bar was located in a great place, why not turn it into a real bar and have Sago work there, since he wanted to earn his food himself. Although Mommy Shiori was completely fine with being Sago's sugar mommy, Sago still insisted in earning his food. As time moved on, Shiori's chronophobia grew more. Her time stop abilities, that's the technical term. Initially, she could only stop time for 0.5 seconds, but now she was at 4.18 seconds, growing at a faster rate than Sago did with his telekinesis. As Sago settled in his new home at the bar and started practicing bartending, Shiori came to rant her feelings a bit and asked Sago for help. Unfortunately for Shiori, the amount of seconds she could stop time for stalled at 44 seconds. Unlike Sago, whose telekinesis grew to no ends in sight, it seems Shiori's time stop ability had a limit to her time. But Sago couldn't help as she was indeed the second person on this planet with powers. There was not really anything Sago could help with. So Shiori started to work on practicality, like being able to see when she stops time. It seems that when she stops time, it doesn't target her body but a small area around her body, just like how her wristwatch works when she stops time. It could mean that she could expand the area of effect and maybe be able to see it. With things moving smoothly, Sago started to theorize on how to create things to fight, like monsters or something of that sort. After a fierce debate with Shiori, the organization's name would be Amaterasu, and their main purpose is to fight the world's shadows. While Sago was eager to recruit more members, ignoring the fact that he had to rip out more of his teleki muscle to make more espers, Shiori wanted a bit more time to develop her powers. It would be a bit disappointing if other members asked Shiori what she could do when all she could do was stop time, not being able to move or even see. A month later, Shiori could now move during her time stop ability, albeit only while being naked. It seems trying to move with her clothing was a task a bit too hard as of right now. So, while Shiori practiced, Sago worked on the enemies the organization would fight. With many ideas Sago came up with, only one made the most logical sense, and that would be slimes, or just water in general. Sago would use telekinesis to shape water into any shape, adding rocks and pebbles or anything near where the water is for added details, and a heart that would need to be destroyed to kill it. It would be something that would be easy to make and be discreet, as water and pebbles could be found anywhere on Earth. To also convince new espers to not reveal the existence of these world shadows, Sago made up this story that fear would empower them. If the public were to find out that the shadows existed, it would bring disaster. And with that, the organization, the enemy, and a story was created. After a while, Shiori started to be content with her proficiency with her powers. She was able to move with clothing and even be able to bring someone along with her in her time-stop state. Thus, it was time to add more people into the organization. Both Shiori and Sago picked out a person they wanted, and eventually, after a rock-paper time freeze, Shiori won. She chose a middle school girl who would be the next person to gain powers and be invited to Amaterasu, the name of the organization. The girl in question was called Toka Hasumi. She was the calm, quiet, unsociable type of person, mainly because of the living circumstance that she grew up with. With both her parents not liking each other that much, Toka learned to not get close to one parent, as that would make the other jealous. Note that she was not actually physically abused, but it could be said that mentally, she developed the idea that it was best to not get close to anyone. With that being the same approach she went with her parents. With Toka being cute to the point where girls in her class would get a bit jealous, she chose to avoid boys and girls altogether. And with a kid with no friends and terrible parents, the amount of stress was accumulating. But Toka, with some leaps in logic, found Buddhism. Every day after school, she would sit at a riverbank and carve Buddha statue as a way to waste time to avoid going home. But besides that, there was no red flags whatsoever. So the middle schooler named Toka Hasumi was invited to Amaterasu. The scene was like this. Toka was walking home one day from school, taking a shortcut she normally took to get to her riverbank, when out of nowhere this creature as big as her stood in front of her. For a moment she froze, absolutely in shock, until this creature threw a punch which made her fall. Now Toka was panicking. She managed to usher a bit of confidence and try to punch the creature, but it did nothing. Toka tried to run with fear in her eyes, not even paying attention to where she was heading, by constantly looking back at the creature and running at the same time, which caused her to bump into this beautiful woman who effortlessly killed this creature. And then this mysterious woman talked some nonsense about a hidden power in her and asked Toka to follow her. And so she did. Not suspicious at all. Did I mention that this whole ordeal was being recorded? With telekinesis, a camera or two was there to capture everything for future use, whatever that may be. Sago was at Ama no Iwato, the name of the bar. When Shiori and Toka came in, Sago acted as a bartender. When Shiori and Toka conversed about what her future would entail, at first Toka was a bit hesitant to join, and Shiori told her that her powers could be removed by her boss. The boss in question is a mysterious man, who was just Sago, but to the rest of the world, besides Shiori, Sago was just a bartender with no power. But later on, Togo felt inspired to join Amaterasu. She wanted to help people, but at the same time, to help people, the people needed to be suffering. To Toka, she felt guilty because she wished suffering on others just so she could help them. But with this new revelation, it seems that people are suffering already, and now she has the power to help them. So why not join this organization that fights these world shadows? After that, Shiori and Toka went to take a bath together in bond because it was raining. Did I even mention that it was raining? After a great refreshing drink after a bath, Shiori showed Toka the secret room in the bar that was only for members. In that room, there were weapons and lots of other high-tech stuff needed for fighting and locating these world shadows. Or that was what was explained to Toka. During this tour, Sago took this time to transplant a telekill muscle on her, just as he did with Shiori. Later on, Shiori took her home as she still had school to attend to the next day. Now, one problem that could occur is if Toka awakened to mind-reading powers. I mean, think about it. Sago and Shiori took months of their lives and money to create this organization and these world shadows to only have the first member awaken to mind-reading abilities and find out that everything was fake. That would just crush the dreams of Sago and Shiori, but that was a worry for the future. After 3 days, it was summer break. During Toka's summer break, she would come to the bar often and chat with Shiori. Mainly because the setting was that it would be best for her to hang out with those with powers, aka Shiori, to awaken her powers faster. When Shiori wasn't there, she would just chill and carve out Buddhist sculptures. Sago was acting as this stoic bartender, so a middle school loner like Toka would not have the courage to befriend someone with that type of aura. While Sago, well, he's a loner himself, so he didn't have the courage to talk to her too. 6 days after summer break, Toka started to awaken her abilities. She awoke into pyrokinesis. She could only make sparks with her hand, but her rate of growth was faster. After a while, Toka could emit a small-scale flame from both her hands, but the temperature she emitted was only 41 Celsius, or 105 Fahrenheit. It was nothing to worry about. It couldn't even set anything aflame. After 14 days, she could now emit flames for 55 seconds, already surpassing the 44 seconds that Shiori could use her time-stop powers for. Yes, Shiori got a bit jealous, just a tad bit. Unfortunately, even after training for 14 days, she could only emit 41 Celsius of heat. Going off guesswork, Sago made the assumption that to increase Toka's temperature of heat, she would have to experience the heat of that sort. For example, according to Toka, her bath temperature was 41 Celsius, so Sago gave the instruction for Toka to increase her heat just a tad bit more for her bath. That theory was correct, and Toka could now emit higher temperature. With more testing, it seems that Toka was a normal human being until she activated her powers. So if she were to dip in her bath, which was 41 Celsius, she would feel the heat. But when her powers were activated, she would not feel the heat. Meaning, in the future, if somehow Toka could train to handle high heat, she could probably take a dip in a volcano and maybe just fly to the sun with the help of Sago's telekinesis and not be immediately evaporated with the heat. Of course, that is if she had no growth limit. Just like how Shiori could only stop time for 44 seconds, maybe there was a temperature limit for Toka's heat. Months later, Toka could now hold out flames from her hands for 18 hours, and that was the limit for how long she could hold out her flames. Unlike Sago, it seems both Shiori and Toka had duration limits to their powers. Her temperature of the flames also increased, with the added ability of throwing her flames like a baseball. Still, she needed more training because she still could not fight any world shadows. Toka's relationship with Shiori grew more, as Shiori seemed like a mother figure. Seeing as both parents worked until night, it wouldn't be a problem if Toka stayed at the bar until late night. Thus Toka did. She spent a majority of her time at the bar. Unfortunately for Sago, their relationship didn't increase much. Sago was just a bartender to Toka. To solve this problem, Sago altered his appearance a bit. He decided to turn the bar into a cafe during the day and a bar during the nighttime. His magnificent plan was to create cute latte art to woo Toka to be a bit more interested in him. He was a little lonely after all. Seeing Shiori and Toka's interact and have fun was a bit of a mental attack as Sago just existed quietly in the background. Luckily for Sago, this Hail Mary attempt worked, and Toka was a bit more open to Sago because of the cute cat latte art Sago served Toka. Yes, it was that simple. Anyways, after a while, Shiori used the power of money to help move Toka closer to the bar. It did take around 2 hours to get to and from Amano Iwato, the bar, to Toka's home. Shiori also managed to convince Toka's father's bosses to give him a raise, in turn getting a promotion, with the expectation that he had to move, in which turn increased the family income that made it no longer necessary for her mother to work, which in turn made her parents stop fighting that often, seeing as money issue was the main reason as to why Toka's parents fought a lot, which in turn made her home life a bit more enjoyable. The scene started with a normal day of middle school. Shota's class was about to get a transfer student. Her name was Toka. Faintly clad in an air of mystery, she was the attention of his class for the next several days. Shota was also interested, but there was no room for boys to interact with Toka due to the fact that the girls were hogging Toka to themselves. Shota found out that Toga and him lived a bit close to each other, seeing as they took the same route home. So one day as Shota was about to head home, it seems that Toga somehow dropped an important piece of assignment that was due the next day. He decided to pick it up for her and considered putting it in her desk, but changed his mind and quickly chased after her as this could be a chance to talk with the new beautiful transfer student, as well as giving her the assignment that fell off her bag. When Shota caught up to Toka, he saw her hanging off her phone and immediately ran off somewhere. Shota was surprised but gave chase. Anyways, he saw Toka running into an alleyway and immediately followed suit. There, he saw something impossible, something that could only be seen in an anime or manga, something amazing. There in the alleyway, he saw a creature burning up in flames, along with Toga Hasumi using a fire extinguisher to put out the fire. All he could do was freeze in place, not knowing what was going on. Toka took out her cell phone and called after Shiori, seeing as this was not a situation she could handle on her own. She messed up and let a random person see her using her powers, along with a world's shadow. Toka was told to bring him to Amano Iwato, thinking Boss or Shiori would do something about the situation. Of course, Shota did not keep quiet along the way. I mean, what was he supposed to say? The secret identity of this new transfer student was a psychic that went around fighting monsters after school. Of course he didn't keep quiet, but unfortunately for him, Toka kept silent as she led him to the bar. Of course, Shota was too amused that he didn't question anything and just followed her. When he arrived at the bar, he was greeted with a glare from the bartender, which frightened him a bit. But then he immediately noticed a beauty like none other, big-breasted too, might I add, and his worries about the sour-looking bartender just vanished. At the bar, Shota was briefed about his psychic powers that were sleeping within him, and was asked if he wanted her boss to awaken his powers. Shota, of course, immediately chose the option to have his powers awaken, instead of just going back to his normal life. After exchanging contacts with both Toka and Shiori, leaving behind Sago, the lonely bartender, Shota went home, probably struggling to sleep as in a few days he would awaken powers he could only daydream about. Now, enough of the beauties of childhood. It seems that Shiori alone could no longer be able to keep up with the expenses. With the ideas of expanding the organization along with adding more people, she alone could no longer be able to keep up. So Shiori and Sago brainstormed 7 ideas, but after re-evaluating them once more, only 2 of these options were feasible in a short amount of time. The rest required credibility, and that would take years if not decades to gain. Seeing as telekinesis was the basis of the workforce, they couldn't just say, "Trust me, bro," without revealing their telekinesis. So the first one was kinetic energy. With telekinesis, Sago could turn the windmill and generate energy, which they could sell. Second was deep-sea diving. Apparently, there were rare materials under the deep waters of the ocean. With the help of a friend of Shiori who started a company called Kaneyama Tech, they would refine the materials Sago would pull out of the ocean. things went smoothly. But while Sago and Shiori were swamped with work, well, Shiori at least, it seems that Shota was starting to make problems. He started low-key bragging about his powers to his friends. Luckily, Toka was able to stop him from going any further, like actually showing his powers to his friends. Oh, did I mention that Shota awakened to cryokinesis, ice ability? He started off with negative zero point 0.2 Celsius, and his growth rate was 1.4. Because Shota was completely different from the obedient Toka, Sago and Shiori had to do something to keep Shota in check before he reveals his powers or even use it for negative things. Shiori decided to give Shota a verbal warning first, but that went on deaf ears, seeing as Shota willy-nilly used his powers to freeze the school pool and make an ice sword at school. Things were starting to go dire. Luckily, Toka had fire abilities and melted anything Shota created. This scene started with Toka and Shota arriving at an empty Ama no Iwato. Shiori went somewhere to become a noble, somehow, and Sago, well, he went somewhere too. That was when the wall phone ringed. With no one else there, Toka picked it up, with the message being a nearby shadow appeared, a level 2 shadow at that. Toka was a bit hesitant to go without backup seeing as it was a level 2, but unfortunately Shiori was uncontactable and she didn't have Sago's number. They decided to fight the level 2 shadow themselves. Shota, on the other hand, didn't see the need for backup. He was pretty confident in his powerful abilities of ice. The shadow was located under the city, in the sewers. Seeing as how Shota was confident in his abilities, Toka made the call to split up and search for the shadow, but on the condition that they would not fight and call for each other upon sight of the shadow. After a while of searching, Shota encountered the world's shadow. He immediately launched a negative 10 Celsius ice punch, but that didn't do anything. The shadow sprouted out tentacles that captured Shota. The next thing he knew, he was in extreme pain. This was not the type of pain Shota felt. It wasn't physical nor was it mental, but the only thing he knew was that it hurt so bad that he couldn't help but yell out in pain and piss himself, along with slowly losing consciousness. Toka, hearing the screams of Shota, immediately rushed over to him with a flaming sword. She cut the tentacle, which freed Shota, immediately releasing a well-aimed fireball to the core of the world's shadow that instantly killed it. Shota, trying to keep his consciousness, looked up at Toka and her flames that saved him. He awoken once more, and all he said was, After a while, Shota could stand and walk, so they went back to the bar. There, Sago was there with cups of black coffee for them both. Toka briefed Sago on what had happened, while Shota sat in a corner seat completely silent, which was extremely unlike him. Shota is what you would call an extrovert. After a while, the kids went back home. Sago, a bit worried, went and stalked Shota a bit more with telekinesis. Shota, instead of heading home, he went shopping for red hair dye, a fire-patterned shirt, and a lighter. It seems he was now fascinated with fire for some reason. With an extra Pyroki muscle or a piece of psychic muscle that he tore from Shota, Sago tried implanting it on himself, thinking he might gain pyrokinesis powers if he did so. It didn't work out in the end. It seems telekinesis was the only power he had. The next day at school, Shota was a completely different person. He dyed his hair red, wore a flame-patterned shirt. Although he was scolded by his teachers and the principal, he actually became a studious person. He was actually taking notes in class and paying attention. He was a completely different person. Seeing as Toka found Buddha, it seems Shota found the truth of fire. Or so that's what he says. Not knowing if the change was because of the incident or because Sago ripped out a piece of ice sword, which is basically teleki muscle for Shota's ice power. Sago decided to experiment with the transplant a bit more. Thus, after 2 months, Sago was able to make a guess on what types of power would manifest depending on how the muscle felt when being transplanted on primates. Seeing as how experiments on humans was not something Sago wanted to do, he did it with primates. Also, with this incident, it was a given that Amaterasu needed a healer for future battles with the world's shadows. To search for a healer, Sago needed to make a healer, if you get what I'm saying. With hundreds of human experiments, plus the primate experiments, only 2 came out to have the ability to heal. Of course, Sago took away the powers of anyone he experimented on so there wouldn't be a rogue psychic out there in the wild. I don't know why, but he probably should have done that. If it was me, if I was Sago in his position, I would definitely just transplant a bunch of random psychics around the world. It would be so much better, but I guess he wanted to play it safe, not wanting to get the wrong people powers that they would use for wrong things. Strangely, the two people who had the power to heal were both 9-year-old, one in Brazil and the other in the UK. Thus came the time once more for Shiori and Sago to battle it out to see who would be the next one to join the Amaterasu. There he was. Sago entered Shiori's room to see a girl wearing a magical girl outfit. The girl was of course Shiori. For some reason, it felt natural and normal for Sago. He didn't even blink twice. The game they would play this time was darts. Last time was rock, paper, scissors, with Shiori cheekily adding the condition that no powers would be used this time, seeing as she was the one who cheated with their first match. Sago agreed, both knowing that they would indeed still use their powers. It was just a matter of using it in a way that it would not be noticed. First was Shiori. Before throwing her darts, Sago used psychological warfare by complimenting her on her outfit and calling her the cutest in the world. But that didn't work though. Shiori landed a bullseye when Sago wasn't looking at the board. It was apparent that Sago stopped time, but Sago didn't have any proof. Thus, he took out his phone and started to record the board, but that was pointless because Sago for some reason threw his dart with inhuman strength, which basically destroyed the dart Shiori threw and landed in the bullseye. Shiori did a trick and Sago initiated a small earthquake to shake any and all darts left on the board, leaving the only dart left was the one on his hand, meaning that it didn't matter where he landed, seeing as it would be the only one on the board. Both Sago and Shiori just laughed it out, seeing as how childish they both were. Sago came out as the victor at the end. The next member would be named Igbadi Sokna Muku, or just Ig for short. She was a primate in an orphanage and was bullied to the point where she was extremely weak, extremely malnourished, and abused by other primates in the orphanage. Sago flew to Brazil and adopted her, a 9-year-old common marmoset, a cat-sized female monkey named Igbadi Sokna Mugu, Ig for short. After a slight hassle at the airport, Sago made it back to Japan. With Ig being 9 years old, she was relatively old compared to human age. Sago took her to the vet recommended by Shiori. For some strange reason, Ig was hostile to Shiori. Shiori couldn't approach Ig as she would bare her teeth. Shiori resigned and she just gave up trying to give some pats. Deciding to close up the bar for a week, Sago used this time to bond with Ig and maybe train her power. Sago's plan was conditioning. Seeing as Ig was a primate, it wouldn't be as simple as telling her to train her healing glycogen, aka the teleki muscle for healer. Instead, every time Sago fed, massaged, or rubbed her head, he would also massage her healing glycogen, trying to inform Ig that this thing existed, and then move on to trying to train it. Seeing as Ig unconsciously used her healing powers occasionally, Sago would praise her every time he felt her healing glycogen activate, basically trying to condition her. Using her powers would equal treats and praises. But that was just her powers activating on random. That Sago purposely injured himself slightly every so often, and Ig, instead of healing him, she would lick where the wound would be instead. Ig had the right idea, but she still didn't use her powers. After 10 days, the bar was open again. But let's not forget this back in the previous chapter. The bar had a close sign permanently on his door, so technically it was closed, but still, somehow, mainly drunk people would still stumble in from time to time during the night. In other words, this bar was just a hangout for Toka and Shota, and a home to Sago. The kids started coming back to the bar and met Ig. Apparently, Ig was not into girls. When Toka tried to touch Ig, she was also hissed away. But Shota, on the other hand, Ig was fine with. Many weeks of walks with Ig later, Sago figured out that Ig disliked makeup, seeing as how the owner who abused her in the orphanage was a female who wore heavy makeup. Ig associated the smell of makeup with danger, meaning someone like Shiori who wore heavy makeup would never be able to come close to Ig. Anyways, on a beautiful afternoon, Sago tripped and bumped his head. Ig, like usual, immediately came to tend to Sago's injury, but this time, Ig used her powers instead of licking. So, for the first time in a month, Ig used her powers to actually heal. Overjoyed, Sago immediately praised and fed her some high-quality good food, trying to condition Ig that healing will get her some high-quality food and lots of praises. After a few weeks of conditioning, Ig started to realize that Sago liked it when she used her abilities. Thus, whenever Sago injured himself, Ig would use her abilities to heal instead of licking the wound. After a month of experimenting, Ig's healing ability didn't need any training at all. It seems like she could heal just about anything. The only thing Ig needed to train was proficiency. Sago even took Ig to a hospital and she managed to heal a cancer patient. Of course, there was no witnesses. Even poison was healed by Ig. More months of observation later, Ig started to grow younger. During testing Ig's blood sample, it seems as if she was a 7-year-old instead of a 9-year-old according to her cells. Ig's healing ability was completely broken. It even had the ability to reverse your age, to make you younger. But let's digress. Toka and Shota was a month away from their 3rd year in middle school, so Sago died down on the rate of shadows appearing, giving some time for the kids to study up, seeing as how high school was just around the corner. As time passed on, the battles were getting a bit boring, seeing as how the kids started getting extremely proficient in their abilities. Battling the world shadows were getting a bit extremely easy, seeing as how Amaterasu was made to make everyday life entertaining. This was getting a bit mundane. And seeing as how the kids were fighting without concealing their identity, Sago and Shiori came up with battle suits that they would wear, along with dog tags, really embracing the secret organization setting. Spring break was near for the kids. The scene started off with the Duchess Shiori Kaburagi drinking black tea at a cafe somewhere in Adachi City in Tokyo, wearing a beautiful black dress, reading a book. Next thing she knew, the dog tag she had on her neck started to vibrate, signaling that a world shadow was here. She quickly paid her bills and left. Scene switch. In a private middle school, there existed 2 students living their mundane school life, when suddenly their dog tag started to vibrate. Knowing what this meant, they immediately made up excuses and left school. Seeing as this call was in the middle of school, it must have been an emergency, a world shadow that Shiori herself could not manage. At the school gate, Shiori was there to pick up the kids. On their way there, they were briefed on the situation. There seems to be a world shadow in the east of Hachikojima Island that was headed towards Tokyo. The world shadow in question was an astonishing 50-meter tall shadow, 10 times bigger than normal ones that they would fight. Seeing as how shadows were made of water, it was even more dangerous seeing as how it was directly on water. Unfortunately for them, Boss was busy fighting another world shadow that was off the coast of Ireland that rendered to be 600 meters. The kids were awestruck when they heard what the boss was fighting right now, but they didn't have time to worry for boss, seeing as they were about to fight one that was 50 meters tall. To make it in the ocean after the car ride, Shiori took out a paper crane, ripped it, and abruptly they were all enveloped in a half-transparent membrane shaped like a crane, and flew off into the ocean. Scene switched to a reporter who was in a helicopter, live streaming and narrating the abnormal series of events happening right before his eyes. What looks to be a 50-meter large water creature is currently in a battle with 3 people dressed in black, along with what looks to be an animal. Besides the massive monster, these people were using real-life superpower, standing on water that was frozen beneath. One used fire, another used ice, and the other seems to be teleporting from place to place. It was bizarre. It was real-life espers. It also appears to be that the trios were losing. They were taking more damage than they were giving. Oh wait, the tide's returning. There was a barrage of what looks to be fireballs constantly hitting the creature, making it evaporate. The creature looks to be half the size it once was now. Probably a Hail Mary attempt. The creature rose up, brought the water around him in the air, trying to create a massive wave to crush the people in black. Luckily, it was not the end, as ice surrounded the trio, protecting them, but the attack was not done. The creature sprouted out water tentacles and slammed 2 of the 3 trio, only for them to get back up as if nothing happened, leading to a counterattack of their own, a barrage of fireballs, but that still didn't destroy the creature. Next was a person with a spear made of ice which stabbed what seemed to be its heart, and after that the creature slowly fell down and disappeared into the sea. What was even more bizarre was that a half-transparent white whale appeared out of nowhere, swallowed the trio, and disappeared into the sea too. What on earth did these reporters and the people who watched on TV just witness with their own eyes? It was morning and Ig today was having monkey food, a slice of apple and a spoonful of honey. It was a day like none other. Well, it would be if not for Sago. He had been too focused on the TV for the past couple of days. Of course, to a monkey, the TV was just pictures and sounds, so she couldn't understand why he was so focused on the TV lately. Sago was happily watching the TV as news reporters from Ireland, UK, and Japan showed live recordings of the battle that took place. Even though they took measures to not identify their identities, he still took a look. The mission was a massive success. The event gave the kids a new and eventful experience, along with revealing the existence of espers to the world. Now, I have no idea why Sago and Shiori wanted to reveal that they existed, but I guess that's the path that they chose. Egg awoken from her afternoon nap to Sago and a bad-smelling Shiori. The smell, of course, being makeup. Egg and Shiori's relationship consisted of constant bickering and pranks. Egg would do pranks to ruin Shiori's looks, while Shiori would use her powers to put Egg in strange places. Egg and Shiori did not like each other that much. We can understand why Egg doesn't like Shiori, but why does Shiori act a bit childish? Maybe a bit jealous that Egg has been taking Sago's attention. Just a bit maybe. There was also that time in Christmas when Shiori invited Sago to have dinner with her, but Sago declined because he had to look after Egg. Maybe she was a bit jealous. Maybe, who knows. Sago and Shiori talked about adult stuff, money and the problems with investigators that might appear in the future. Seeing as how the technology they had was telekinesis, still Shiori stated that she had it under control. Along with Shiori was trying to gain influence in the government, police, and mass media. I mean, a secret organization must have power in more ways than just psychic abilities. After a while, the kids came to hang out at the bar, and there they talked about all the rumors spreading on the internet while opening up gifts from boss. Toka and Shota celebrated the fact that they beat a boss-like world's shadow. Sago and Shiori celebrated the great achievement of creating such a big spectacle. And that was the end of Volume 1 of this pseudo book. Although there are multiple volumes of this series, I will not continue them. Maybe I'll do Volume 2 because I actually did like Volume 2, but for now, I'm not planning on doing that. But I need you to remember that this is not an audiobook. This is a pseudo book. This is basically me writing a summary. You see, one of my goals in life is to write stories. And if those stories turn into books, well, so be it. But to do that, I need to practice writing. So I'm taking my favorite stories that I have read so far, and I'm going to turn them into summaries. Do these summaries, I will learn how to practice writing, because I can say for a fact that this summary is my second pseudo book that I have done, and it is absolutely terrible. Garbage, if I do say so myself. When I was trying to record this, it was a pain in the gluteus maximus to read. Also, I don't usually talk that much. In fact, for the past 2, 3, 4 years, I did not speak at all. I was basically a mute, so making this pseudo book was a bit troublesome. It was a bit hard since trying to speak and trying to read, trying to articulate my words was just not something that I could do. Anyways, thank you for watching. This series pseudo book will continue, but it will not be of this series. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in a different video. Johnny!